To get the very best from a DCC decoder, we need to customize the decoder to suit the locomotive it's installed in. The combination of the Sprog and Jmri Decoder Pro presents us with a simple and very cost-effective means of doing so. Let's take a close look at the Sprog and what it is. The Sprog is actually a family of DCC programmers and controllers. It's designed by Merg member Andrew Crossland. There are several different models in the family. We'll be looking at the Sprog 2 version 4. It's primarily used for programming DCC decoders. The Sprog 2 uses Jmri Decoder Pro as the user interface. For full details on the entire Sprog range, please go to the following web address. Let's take a look at what we can do with the Sprog. First of all, most DCC controllers are not particularly user-friendly when programming decoders. The examples on the right show typical screens from programmers. To understand what is happening inside the decoder and to change its settings, it's not very easy with these controllers as they're not particularly intuitive. Decoder Pro offers a very user-friendly interface on either your PC or laptop. The Sprog provides the link between the Decoder Pro and the programming track. It is the Sprog that provides the PWM pulse, controlled by the program. One of the main advantages of using this combination is that you can program your decoder from the comfort of your desk. In addition, if you have a rolling road, you can actually run the locomotives from the comfort of your desk. This makes maintaining locomotives on a rolling road a very simple task. This is the hardware that is required, and depending on where you purchase the Sprog 2, you may get some or all of that hardware. What is required is the Sprog 2, a USB cable with an A and a B connector, and a regulated power supply capable of a minimum of 1.25 amps. If you do not use a cable extender, then you'll have to cut off the connector from the power supply and hardwire it into the Sprog. As you can see, the green connector to the top of the Sprog. Here we have the Sprog connected to a programming track and a rolling road. The rolling road is not essential, but without it, you'd be missing out on one of the main benefits of having the Sprog Decoder Pro combination. Before we go further, we must take a short look at CVs. CVs, or configuration variables, are the memory addresses found within the decoder. CVs enable the user to customize the performance of the decoder, for example, editing the locomotive's unique address, changing the acceleration, deceleration, turning on lights, modifying sound, changing the back EMF, modifying speed curves, and many more, as we shall see later. It should be noted that high-end decoders have far more programmable CVs than low-end decoders. Key CVs, such as the loco ID, acceleration, deceleration, back EMF, all have the same number right across all manufacturing types as per the NMRA standard. For example, CV1 will always be the ID of the decoder. We'll be looking at three different types of decoders. This is the first one. It's the most simple, and it's a Hornby 4-function decoder. You can see on the left-hand side we have primary address CV1, which has a default value of 3, which again is a default value for any new decoder that you purchase. As previously mentioned, we have the acceleration rate, deceleration rate, the back EMF. Apart from that, there isn't a great deal that you can change with the simple 4-function decoders. If we now move to the Hornby TTS sound decoder, this particular one is for an A4 Pacific. You can see that there are a significant number of additional CVs. Most of these pertain to the sound. As you can see, 162 through to 177, they're concerned with changing the volume of the sound functions. We also have the ability to modify the way in which the motor operates. We'll come on to this a little later also. Then we have a high-end sound decoder. This is a ZIMO decoder. This one has been prepared with sound files by U-Choose. I don't expect you to be able to read this, and in fact it's only one side of a double-sided sheet of A4. We have a significant number of CVs. They do not all pertain to this particular decoder, as it's set up for a steam function. The decoder can also be used with sound files from diesel or electric locomotive, hence the reason that there are so many different CVs to modify. Let's take a look at the 3 locomotives that we'll be using to demonstrate the capabilities of Sprog and Decoder Pro. First, we have a Caledonian Railways 040. This is fitted with the Hornby 4-function decoder. We then have a Hornby A4 Mallard. This one is fitted with the Hornby TTS A4 sound decoder. Finally, we have Duke of Gloucester fitted with a ZIMO MX645R sound decoder. Before we can use the Sprog Decoder Pro combination, we have to understand what Jmri is. Jmri is an acronym for Java Model Railroad Interface. It's open source and it contains a suite of programs for model railways, not just Decoder Pro. The programs are based on Java, which is a high-level programming language that must be installed before installing Jmri. First, let us search Download Java for Windows. Once we have found the appropriate website, we need to ensure that Java has installed correctly before we download Jmri. We then search Jmri download. Here we are at the appropriate web page. We'll open up Jmri releases. From here we will click on the Windows production release Jmri 4.26. You can see the file downloading. A Jmri folder will appear in the programs list. This will contain the Decoder Pro icon. You must connect the Sprog to the PC via the USB before starting Decoder Pro, or it will not open. The Sprog should be recognized and installed as a new device on your PC or laptop with no need to add drivers. Once the Sprog has been installed, then double-click on the Jmri icon and open Decoder Pro. When we double-click on the Decoder Pro icon, a dialog box will open to allow us to set up the program. English is fine, default owner. Here we must set up the system manufacturer, as Decoder Pro can accept many different controllers. In this case, we're looking for Sprog DCC. We then open the system connection. So you see there are a number of different Sprog options. These relate to other Sprogs within the family. We'll be taking Sprog. Then we need to set up the serial port. You see none is selected there. COM3 is the one that we actually have connected to. Everything else is okay, so we'll now click Next. Now we will finish the setup. This takes us to the opening screen that we should see for the first time. It actually tells you what to do on the screen. Click on the new logo button. Select the decoder of your choice, or read the type from the decoder. Then thirdly, add the details to create your first new entry. So let's try it. New loco. You'll see that this opens up a box with many different locomotive decoder types. Well, we could use read type from decoder, but I know in this particular case it actually doesn't work for this decoder. Just do it manually. It's a Hornby, it's a digital, and it's an R8249. Well, we could use this basic roster entry screen, but I prefer to use the Open Comprehensive Programmer, and I'll explain why in a few moments. So we'll open it. That takes us to the roster entry screen. From here, Caledonian Railway 040. You can add the road number, road name if you wish. I'll just put in Hornby. Now notice we have DC address number 3. That is because this is a default value for all new decoders. We'll be changing that. Leave these areas alone for the moment, and we'll just save it to the roster. Exit that page. You'll see that we now have the first item on our roster. We just want to give ourselves a little more space here. There we go. Occasionally you might find that this first line is either very small or almost non-existent. It's quite easily dealt with. Let's click Edit, Preferences, and if we go to Display, this gives us the opportunity to change the font size. For example, if I change it to 20, and just hit Save. You have to restart Decoder Pro, but that just takes a moment. Let us now add a second new loco. This time we'll attempt to read from the decoder. As you'll see, the software reads a number of CVs from the decoder, and it comes up with a Hornby TTS vent van. Well, clearly that's not correct, but that's not unusual, and it's close enough so that we can find what we're really looking for, which is Hornby sound decoder. And just look for the A4. There it is, A4. Once again, open the comprehensive programmer. Mallard, Hornby. Then we'll just save that to the roster. You'll see we have a problem here. We have two identical addresses for two different locomotives. I'll show you how to resolve that in a few moments. Let us now add our third and final new loco. Again, I'm going to read the type from the decoder, and as I do so, just take a note around about here, and you'll see the CVs being read. What we have is a ZIMO decoder, and because these CVs are similar across several decoders, we have a choice. That happens to be this one. So select that, and open the comprehensive programmer. Type in the name of the new locomotive, which is Duke of Gloucester. The manufacturer once again. And let's save it. Now we have the 3 locomotives, but we also have 3 identical DCC addresses. Let us take the 040 and open its program. You've seen this screen before, it's the roster entry. Now we're going to go to CVs. The CVs you see are not the CVs from the locomotive decoder. They are CVs from the Decoder Pro file base. These can be very, very useful if you have a decoder which has suffered problems and you need to rebuild it. And in this case, you can take the values from the file by clicking on Write Full Sheet. That will write those values to the locomotive decoder. In our case, the loco decoder is perfectly okay, but we do need to change the ID. But first of all, let us read what the actual ID is. Now the ID is number 1, which is fine for our purposes. So having read that, let us now read the full sheet. Now notice that number 18 has not been read. If that happens, it's usually that we haven't had good contact. So we'll reseat the locomotive and try again. There we have it. We have all of the CVs from our decoder. We then exit that window. We have the opportunity to either save all those values to the database or close and leave the original CVs in place. Let's save and close. So now looking back, we can see that we now have decoder address as 1. And then we'll do exactly the same for the Duke of Gloucester and Mallard. We'll now open the program for Duke of Gloucester. Go to the CV list, which immediately you can see is a much longer list than the 04 tank. But there we go, up to over 800 CVs. These are once more from the file, they're not from the decoder. So let us read. It's actually number 14. That is its normal running number on my layout. But for the purposes of the presentation, we'll change that to number 3. And I'll write that to the decoder, so the ID is now number 3. I also want to record all of the CVs from the decoder. So I'll once again read the full sheet. You can see the values from the file being replaced by values from the actual decoder. But as this process will take up to half an hour for a large decoder, we'll take a break and come back. That did take about 30 minutes to complete. But now let's just take a check to see that all of the CVs have been correctly written. So just slowly pan down, looking for anything which is highlighted in red. Looks clean. Yes, all is well. If any CVs were highlighted in red, all you need to do is reseat the locomotive, go back to the individual CV, just click read again. That'll be fine. Now that we have captured the actual CVs, we will close the page, save and close to the configuration file. We now have one more locomotive to load into the database, and that is Mallard. Open up the program window. Go to the CVs. Again, these CVs are all from the file. And you'll notice that we certainly have far more CVs than for the simple 4-function decoder, but not nearly as many as those for the high-end decoder fitted to the Duke. Let's read the local ID. So Mallard's true identity is number 11. Let's change to 2. We write that, so we now have number 2. Well, let's read the full sheet once again. You'll notice that there are differences between the information held in the decoder and those in the file. And that's simply because whoever has written the file and added it to Decoder Plus, they have added their preferred settings. We've now completed reading of the CVs. Didn't take much time at all, but you'll see we do have a number of CVs highlighted in red. I happen to know that 156 and 157 are not part of the Hornby set of CVs, so we'll leave those alone for the time being. Just going to reread these CVs individually. And there we go. This particular sequence of CVs, they're all 4, you notice. They happen to be CVs related to the sound volume settings. And one more. Okay. Now we will close. There we have our trio on the roster, numbers 1, 2, and 3. One, 2, 127 gives me more than enough scope to cover my fleet. Now, I know there are people who like to use the actual running number here, or part of the running number. That's okay, it's personal choice. But as the numbers increase in size, you do run into the issues of long addresses, which I won't be covering here. And also there's a possibility that if you're using, let's say, the last 2 or even the last 3 numbers, you might end up with another locomotive exactly the same. However, as I said, that's personal choice. Now that we have our 3 locomotives in the roster, let's take a look at them in a bit more detail. I'm going to highlight the 040, open the program, expand it. We'll see once again the roster entry page. That's fine. Here we have the basic page. It confirms the active address, also the fact that we are using short address and not long address. Then I have locomotive direction, which is normal. If it's been miswired for any reason, that can be reversed. Here, this is important. It's currently set to 14-speed step format. Highly recommended that we set that to 128. Also, the power source, it is set at digital only. If you need to run your DCC locos on a DC layout, then you could have DC conversion enabled. I personally don't recommend that. DCC locos do not run very well on DC. And if you're running them on DCC, if there's a glitch in the track, sometimes they can take off as a runaway. So I'd recommend digital only. Next page is the motor, acceleration, deceleration rate, and EMF feedback cutout. You can check to see the effect of changing these values in your decoder manual. Basic speed control. It's not a category that this decoder supports, nor is the speed table. Function map simply shows that this is a 4-function decoder. Those functions are headlights, front and rear, and 2 available functions for auxiliary use. Lights, it has none. Analog control, set to digital only. There is no consist, no advanced, no sound, therefore no sound levels. Now we come back to the CVs, which we have seen before. By checking the information that came with your DCC decoder, you'll find each of these CVs refers to, and also get an understanding as to the values that could be changed to and what effect that will have on the running. Let's look at the next locomotive, Mallard. Open the program. Again, we've seen this before. Basic page, active address 2. We do have the 128 speed steps and digital only, that's fine. Motor in this case has additional information. For this, you have to refer to the decoder manual. These algorithms determine the speed profile of the locomotive, and as such are unique to the particular decoder being used. Nothing in basic speed control or the speed table or the function map or the lights or the analog control is set to digital only, which is fine. Nothing in consist, nothing in advanced. Sound, we do have a loco start delay, again referred to the decoder manual for that. When we get sound levels, however, it's a different story. This page allows us to look at all of the different sound functions that we have, and we can change the values. Therefore, we can change the sound levels either individually, just by moving the slider, or we can change a quick set volume. For example, if I set a quick set volume and then click the right changes on the sheet, that will be changed. I'm happy with 8, so I'll change that back. One of the advantages of using Decoder Pro is the ability to adjust sound levels and then check the change that you've made on the loco sitting next to you. We've already seen the CV page, and once again, if you consult your sound manual decoder, you'll see the purpose of each and every one of these CVs and gain a greater understanding as to what the effects will be of changing any one of them. Finally, we come to the Duke of Gloucester, which has a high-end sound decoder. Not surprisingly, we'll see a lot of possible windows to open. I won't open them all, I'll just go through a few of them quickly. Basics we've seen before, everything in order there. Motor, quite a lot of information on the motor and quite a lot of changes. At this stage, we will basic speed control. This gives you the opportunity to add a starting voltage and also a mid-range voltage and a high voltage. That will set the main parameters of the motor. Speed table. Now we're into the realms of the experts. The speed table, as we have here, will gradually build up speed. as you increase the throttle. This means that you have greater control of the locomotive speed at different levels. You don't need to make any adjustment to this unless you really know what you're doing. I would suggest that, again, you leave well alone. Function map, quite detailed because we have a lot of different functions here. And as you can see, we have front, rear lights, and then we have the different functions relating to the decoder sheet. Lights. Also, a page full of activity, best left alone at this stage. Analog controls, consists, advanced functions. Let us go to ZIMO sound levels. This is not unlike the page that we saw with the previous Hornby TTS. Here we have the opportunity to set the maximum volume that we can achieve, which is a good idea because that can protect the sound decoder. You can set the overall volume up to 65 with this slider, and here we have two keys which can change the overall volume, which, as we'll be seeing, can be performed live as the loco is running. Let me go to the CVs. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of CVs that we can change here. As you gain more confidence and more understanding of your sound decoder, then you'll be able to fine-tune these CVs to suit your locomotive. Now that we have loaded all of the information from our decoders into Decoder Pro, it would be a good idea to save that information outside the program, such as on a memory stick or elsewhere on your PC. This also means that you could take this same roster and transfer it to another machine. So let's look at how we can do that. Go to File, go to Export Complete Roster. Now look for the memory stick, which happens to contain another file, but that's okay. We'll give it a name. Let's just say Jmri, and we'll save it. If I go back, I find that memory stick. There we have Jmri roster. That means I can now delete these entries if I wish. And that's it. I now wish to import a roster. I can import a complete roster. Go back to the memory again. This time I'm going to import a different roster. And that is the complete working roster for my own layout. Now let's look at Decoder Pro Throttle. This is certainly one of the most powerful features of Decoder Pro. Let's set up a throttle for the off-road tank. Here I've already completed it. It's a very simple 4-function decoder, therefore it has a function for the front light, the rear light, and 2 spare functions. You can save that to the roster. Let's create a throttle for the Duke of Gloucester. We'll put the labels, and here we see all of the functions taken from the decoder specification. You'll notice that there are 2 functions which have a tick in the box. That means they are locked functions. When you select them, they will stay on until you switch them back off. Save that to the roster. And now we'll take a look at the Duke's throttle. There we have all of the functions on the throttle, ready to go. If you wish to check out a locomotive rather more quickly, you can always open up a new throttle using the Actions drop-down. Find the loco you're looking for on the list. Let's take the 2800. And you can run the throttle, use all of the functions, just that you have to refer to the decoder sheet to know which ones they are. Now let's open a new window and we'll look at the Duke on the rolling road together with the throttle. We now have the Duke on the screen. I'm just going to power up the throttle and turn on the sound. Let's check out a few things. These 2 functions can change the volume live. Now let's run the Duke. This is a particularly useful facility for running in locomotives, also maintaining them. It's very easy to clean the wheels with cotton bud. terminal, you can ensure that the locals are running exactly how they should. Let's take a look at one of the more common Decoder Pro initialization problems. This typically occurs when you are setting up the Sprog for the second time and you choose a different USB socket. We open up Jmri and you'll see there's an issue there. It doesn't recognize the COM port. So we edit the connections, which gives us a dialog box. We check the serial port. We're actually on COM5. So you click COM5, we click Save, then Jmri Decoder Pro opens up normally. Finally, let's take a look at Decoder Pro Index. This is a particularly useful page because we've only really scratched the surface on the possibilities of Decoder Pro. What we have here is a complete table of the contents, and each of those subheadings will give you a lot of additional detail. It's a very comprehensive programmer, and you can use it at a number of different levels, either as a basic programmer, if all you wish to do is to change a few CV levels or the ID of the locomotive, or you can use it in conjunction with throttle to maintain locomotives. We can really get into the heart of the DCC decoder and optimize the decoder to its highest potential. I hope this has given you a useful overview into the potential of the Sprog and Decoder Pro combination. It's an incredibly powerful and comprehensive set of tools that are invaluable for anyone who runs DCC.